Good evening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the lead-in music when you do a quick Google search for music about card games. This is the music that comes up, so I hope that you enjoyed that. We are thrilled to welcome you for our third Thursday program, The Art of Games, a partnership program of the Asheville Art Museum, Well Played Board Game Café, and Devil's Foot Beverage Company. My name is Christy McMillan, and I'm the museum's Director of Learning and Engagement. I will be your host for this evening's program. For this evening, all of the participants' microphones are muted. If you'd like to unmute your video at any time, you're welcome to do so. Please note that we're recording, so if you prefer not to appear in the recording, be sure to turn off your video. Although we wish we could spend this evening playing games with you at Well Played Board Game Cafe or at the museum, we have a fun evening planned for you. We posted a couple puzzles and an Asheville Art Museum word search to our website yesterday and sent you the links. Feel free to play along or work on them after the program. While Perspective Cafe on the museum's rooftop is closed, our partners at Food Experience are offering great food for curbside pickup. And you can pick up some tasty, non-alcoholic ginger beer from Devil's Foot. They have a fantastic selection. If you weren't able to pick up some for tonight, I encourage you to place an order with them online soon. As you'll see shortly, Devil's Foot's mini brews can be enjoyed straight from the can or mixed into your favorite cocktail or mocktail. Now I'd like to go over the flow of tonight's program. We'll start with Ben Colvin from Devil's Foot Beverage Company. If you're not able to make these cocktails tonight, don't worry. We've included recipes on the museum's website so that you can go back and get them. Then Kevin Frazier, co-owner of Well Played and a former history professor, will give a brief history of card games and look at card games as art. Following that, our assistant curator, Hillary Schroeder, will hop on to tell us about some works in the museum's collection that feature cards or card playing. Finally, you'll hear from Well Played's game master, Tanner Johnson, about Draft-A-Dragon, a game he created in 2017. He'll also lead us in a demo of the game. We'll have a Q&A with our presenters at the end, but please feel free to add any questions or comments you have in the chat box as we go. Let's get started. I'd like to turn it over to Ben from Devil's Foot Beverage Company. Welcome, Ben. What are you mixing up for us this evening?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, we're going to do a couple cocktails and a couple of mocktails too. Because just the background of what we do at Devil's Foot. I spent a lot of time in the nonprofit world, and then my wife and I got pregnant and went to celebrate at one of Asheville's many breweries, and there wasn't an option for her there. So in the middle of that, we were kind of mixing things from Moscow mules and stuff in our backyard, and got to a point where we wanted to make something a little bit fresh, clean, healthy, organic, less sugar, and we launched Devil's Foot Beverage Company. So everything that we do is we fresh extract out of fresh roots and fruits that are all organic. We mix our sweeteners with organic cane sugar and honey, and it just allows it to have a little more flavor without being syrupy or overly sweet. So we can get more of a dry celebration, bubbly goodness out of it. So I'm happy to be here. We are going to do a couple of the easy cocktails that we do. You can do variations on all of these. You can, of course, add more sugars. You can add agave syrups. You can add different kinds of flavorings, but just the most simple kind of things. I'm going to show you. I'm going to move the screen down. This game is all about garnish. So we're going to do our Mountain Mojito first. And the trick that I like to do, if we're not adding tons of syrups, is to add some lime in first. So go ahead and add your ice. As if you're not gonna shake. And I like to add Asheville vodka from H&H Cultivated Cocktails in Asheville. I'm out of their vodka now, so I'm also using Nepentati. It's an organic distillery out of Charleston area, like 1.5 ounces. Of course, a little more for Kevin Frazier. It's not my first time opening for Kevin Frazier, by the way. And in this one, we use the blackberry ginger beer. So this is a blackberry infused ginger beer that we make. Kind of make it more of a mountain flavor. You can see it's a lot more purpley, delicious, wonderful. Garnish with your limes. Garnish with every. I'm gonna have that later, by the way. I'm gonna do some other quick ones, really quick, easy. Mojitos. Everybody loves the mojito. Mash your fresh mint from your garden as much as you can. Macerate it in your glass. I actually do the original H&H cultivated cocktail, dark rum it does. I know that sounds weird, but it's kind of my favorite way to do this. Another like ounce and a half. Little bit of lime in that guy, just to add a little extra. And then we use the limeade. So this is all fresh limes that we use, organic limes, cane sugar, honey, garnish with a little more mint. Again, I'll give that one to somebody else, so I'm not drinking all these tonight. But then the best part about this, we get a lot of people that tell us they love what we do because they are not drinking, or they are pregnant, or they are sober for a number of years. And there should be something to celebrate, something to be enjoyed with everybody in the room. And so we do a lot of mocktails and things like that. Easy one for the kids. This is our blueberry lemonade. So it's fresh blueberries and organic lemons. And again, it's all about the garnish. You're gonna get a really cool blue color. We had a lot of frozen blueberries. We picked these at our friend's house out in Leicester, and then add a little something fun for them. A little lemon curl, something fun. Delicious, sweet, sour, kids like that. And then the last one I'm gonna make is our Arnie Palmy. So it's a black tea we do with Asheville Tea Company, mixed with our lemonade. So it's kind of a half and half. You can of course add liquor to either of these, but the kids really like these. We just got fresh Georgia peaches the other day. Yum. So we would like to macerate some of the Georgia peaches. I'm not macerating because we're kind of in a hurry. But then you'll see this kind of flavor. It looks really brown and delicious. Use some more lime on this guy. There you go. We've got a couple mocktails for the kids. Here we go, blueberry tea. It's a little bit of caffeine in black tea, but not enough to really make it crazy. There we go. So these are just some of our flavors that we do. We also have some really spicy ginger beers, our Fuego can. We're available in Asheville, everywhere around Asheville. We're in some retail stores. If you really want to get fun, this is what my daughter likes me to do. Stir her drinks with the Star Wars lightsaber chopstick that lights up like an LED. Oh, very cool. So anyway, a way to celebrate your kids, have them be part of it while you're having a cocktail, and they can have a little fun too.
The lightsaber makes it that much more fun. Thank you so much, Ben. I have to say that your cocktails and mocktails look a whole lot better than this 3-hour-old iced latte that I'm drinking, and I really wish that we were together right now so I could grab one of those.
If we were in the same room, we can make everybody. All right. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. I hope everyone at home now has a delicious drink to enjoy for the remainder of the program. So I didn't realize that you had opened before for Kevin Frazier, and I'd like to welcome Kevin now from Well Played Board Game Cafe. Kevin, we've all played card games since we were kids. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of card games? And I also understand that you found some cool artist-created games in the museum's collection.
That's right, Christy. I'm looking forward. Usually I'm doing talks on the history of Asheville, so I'm excited to mix it up tonight. I am going to share my screen so that folks can see what's going on, but that's not the right one. Screen share, history of cards. There we go. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm really thrilled to be with you. I'm Kevin Frazier. I serve as the executive director of Western Carolina University's campus in South Asheville. A lot of folks may not realize that WCU has a graduate campus of about 725 students down in Biltmore Park. But I'm also one of the co-owners of Well Played, a board game cafe, which is currently on a hiatus because I'm not sure that you're aware, but there's a global pandemic going on. So we've got a little pause there. And I'm really excited to get to talk about card games tonight. Card games are really culturally ubiquitous. They cross over all the continents, from all kinds of different cultures. There's a lot of discussion as to where the oldest card games originated, but on the whole, it's believed to be China. It takes us back to the 9th century Tang Dynasty. And there was a game that we see reference to called the leaf game. And we think it referred to leaves of paper. Card games and their development are very much tied to the creation of paper. They have, from their very origins, always been about paper. In China, as this example shows, card games were able to grow because of woodblock printing and the ability to somewhat mass produce the games. We think that card games then made their way through India, Persia, and eventually to Egypt. One of the oldest surviving sets of cards we have on Earth comes from the Mamluk period of Egypt in the 12th century. And this is a photograph of one of the oldest surviving card games. So one of the interesting things about researching cards during this period is, of course, the areas that it came through are Islamic areas, of which gambling is not is not supported by the religion, and then also iconography is not as well. And so it's an interesting sort of path as to how all that did and also sort of navigates through Islam in that period. We see the first cards in Europe by the 1300s, and this is, in fact, is the oldest known European card set, dating from just about that period. One of the reasons it's not actually from the cards we know, but it's from, we know that cards were in Europe by the 1300s because of the ban on card playing, the first one being in Bern in 1367. That's the first reference to card playing. These cards date a few years later, somewhere between 1390 and 1410. Cards would develop fairly rapidly throughout Europe with a lot of different variations by country. Some would have, we would see the 4 suits develop pretty quickly, but the iconography of the suits, as you can see, is different from what you and I know until we get to France. And clubs, our spades, hearts, clubs, and diamonds are very much from France, and then would move over to England as well. These are what artists refer to as pips, the little indications of the 4 suits by those icons, typically in the corners. Now cards, here's a great example that shows you sort of the development of the different pips all the way to the French. And even to this day, German cards and Swiss cards and Spanish cards are different from French cards. French and English cards, for the most part, are extremely similar. Cards are very expensive to produce, and because of that, they become pretty early art pieces. And here's some great examples of some really beautiful ace of spades. Because the games were so expensive, and even in the early days before full press production, they're done with wood blocks, but that's still a pretty tedious process. And so folks decided, well, we might as well make good use of all of this. Cards were an expensive game. The ace of spades is oftentimes the most elaborate card in the deck. The question is, why the ace of spades? I mean, even in popular culture today, the ace of spades is like the card, right? That's considered the top card. And it's because for many centuries in Europe, packs of cards were taxed. And typically the starting suit on a pack of cards was the suit of spades. And of course, the ace of spades would be the top. And so originally they would put tax stamps on the ace of spades. And then what they would do is you would buy the set of cards and have to go to another location to buy the tax card. And here's an example of a British one. You can see there was a 3p duty on a pack of cards at this time. So you actually didn't get the ace of spades with the set. You had to go to the tax office to pay for the ace of spades. This is also a great example of a change that began to happen in cards, first in 1693, and then as cards came to the United States, made a major change and a pretty permanent change that spread throughout the world after the American Civil War, and that's putting the card indicators in the corners. You and I don't think much about it because all cards we're used to seeing have this ace or king or whatever in the two corners. And that innovation was so that you could hold the deck very close and be able to do what you and I know as the fan fold of cards. Before, it was very hard to tell what cards, and you had to do a lot of hand shuffling. This way you could keep your cards closer at hand and be able to see what you had in hand. One of the other innovations to come about were the reversible court cards. Over to your left, you'll see an older set of court cards predating the 1790s. One of the things you'll notice is that all the images, of course, are single images and they're upright images. Well, the problem with playing cards when you had the court cards in your hand is if you wanted to spin them around to see whether or not you had a king or a jack and they were upside down, people realized you had a court card because you were spinning the card in the deck. And so by the late 1700s, that innovated the court cards to be the reversible cards that we know today, with the image in mirror reverse on the top and bottom. So no matter how you held the cards, you knew which court card that you had in hand. There's a lot of conversation over the years about the kings and who's represented on the kings of the card. While there's disagreement on it, there is sort of a general belief that there are three kings that are most often represented: David, the king of Israel, Alexander the Great, Charlemagne, and Caesar Augustus, though it's sometimes Julius Caesar. And so those vary between culture to culture. The French cards at times definitely had identifiable French kings. English cards at times had identifiable English kings. But in England, there's actually one other intriguing part that still holds to this day, and it's called the British rule. Today, because Elizabeth is Queen of England, in Great Britain, the Queen is actually the highest of the court cards and not the King. When either Charles or William becomes King of England, then the King card under British rule will be back to being the top of the four court cards. One of the other peculiar things in the artwork of cards is the King of Hearts, who's often referred to as the Suicide King, because he's got this sword. You may have never noticed this before, that he's jabbing into his head. There's a lot of debate as to why this is the case. Here are some older cards on the right-hand side, and you'll see, again, he's clearly got this sword. What's believed and generally accepted by scholars is that originally the depiction is him holding a mace or an axe, later turned into a sword, and that over time in the wood blocks, part of the sword was worn off. They came to look like it was he was pushing it into his head. But then over time, as the designs developed, they just continued to show that with him pushing it into his head. Now, cards, of course, because of their ubiquity, also have great opportunities for beautiful artwork. These are some fairly modern examples of card sets by different artists, some of which are a little more evocative of the historic iconography, and some of which are absolutely not, but still get across the card very, very well. Some examples of this actually show up in the collection at the Asheville Art Museum. So there's a family, Peter Norton, that if any folks who are computer people, this does in fact tie to the Norton antivirus folks. They, for many years, he and his wife Gwen would commission artists that they would send out different art pieces to their friends and acquaintances around the country. Typically around 3,000 different pieces would be commissioned each Christmas and holiday season. Well, 2 of those actually are in the collection at the Asheville Art Museum. One of which is Kevin Summers, once again, but different this time, the Canasta edition, which was done in 2014, and you see depicted over on your left-hand side. And then also was Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies, which we'll talk a little bit here in just a minute about cards moving beyond the traditional 40 or 52 card decks that we're typically familiar with today. And that you see Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies from 1996 over on the right-hand side that's also in the collection. Now, I actually want to put a little pause there because I want to turn over to Hillary to talk about some other components of cards and art in the collection at the Asheville Art Museum. And then I want to talk a little bit then about some changes that happened with cards in the 20th century, and then introduce Tanner in the game.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was so interesting. Yeah, in my family, we always use the Suicide King as a wild card. And I think a lot of people, yeah, I see some thumbs going up, also do that. And, you know, I never knew what the origin of that was. So thanks so much for going over the iconography with us. So as Kevin said, we are also joined tonight by Hillary Schroeder, one of the museum's assistant curators. Hillary, tell us about some works in our collection that pair well with tonight's theme.
Sure. Well, I am so glad, Kevin, that you opened with all of those depictions of artists or people playing cards by artists from over the time kind of course of history. I knew sort of about artist card sets, but I didn't know that there were so many things in the development of the cards themselves. So it was really cool to get a look at that. But we also have some great examples in our collection of people playing cards or artists thinking about cards as part of the artwork they're making. So Christy, if you would go to the first one of those, please. This work from the 1920s is by Alexander Cruz, and as you can see, it's called Friendly Card Game. If you look here, it's 3 gentlemen, and they are sitting in a rather cozy study with a samovar and a phonograph, so that kind of helps us get the feel of the time period, but they kind of look like they're having a lively good time. One of the things that I am thinking about as soon as I see the title of this work, Friendly Card Game, is whether or not it's actually a friendly card game, as many people probably have experienced. Playing games, including even just a simple card game, can get pretty tense at times, and they look like they're having fun, but who knows what's about to happen with that guy holding up the card that he's about to throw down. Maybe it's friendly because they are playing with poker chips and not real money. I don't know. If you want to comment in the chat as to whether or not you think this is friendly, go for it. We can't see what their cards are, and it's hard to tell what they're playing, but I imagine it's something like poker or some other game that involves betting, where there are definite winners and losers. So Christy, if you take us to the next one, which is a slightly different scene. In this photograph by Carrie Mae Weems from 1990, and it's not titled, but it's from her series, The Kitchen Table. And this series really focuses on this little bit quieter domestic space of the kitchen, which I think a lot of us spend our time in, hanging out, doing things sometimes like playing cards with our family, maybe after dinner. This couple here seems to be pretty engaged in the game. Christy and I were talking about how it kind of looks like the female figure has her head down, but if you really zoom in, it's possible she's smirking a little bit, and she doesn't have her cards up, so it's hard to know exactly what the dynamic is between the two of them. But his cards are revealed, and Christy and I were trying to look to see if he had a good hand or not for whatever game they might be playing. But a slightly different scene for sure. And then in our third example, doesn't really look much like the other two. And I think all of the images that Kevin showed had people playing a game. And this work by Jennifer Bartlett, I think is really fascinating because even though we don't see people playing cards, this is really about sort of her experience with games and with chance and games of chance. So you can see that there are a couple of games. There's an ace of, or a couple of cards, ace of diamonds, I can see, and a few others that are revealed. And she often includes both dominoes and playing cards in her paintings and drawings. And I actually found a really great interview where she was talking about her relationship to games, and she said, "I am competitive to the extreme of being unable to play most games because I hate to lose." And one thing that she also said that I thought was pretty interesting was that when she includes dominoes in her game or in her drawings and paintings, she will actually recreate actual games that she played with her studio assistant. Whereas with the cards, she actually pulls them randomly so that the person or figure or story in the image is given a good or bad hand at random. And I like this work as well because it's connected to John Cage, who some of you may have heard me talk about, who's also in the collection. And the artist, Jennifer Bartlett, is very interested in chance operations, so where randomness becomes a tool for making decisions about how something is made. And the cards are part of that randomness for her. It looks like some folks are having problems with sound. I am not sure why. Okay, well, I'm going to keep moving on, but just because I have only a few minutes, I want to leave you with a couple more quotes from that interview as we go into learning about how to play a card game, which I hope some of you are playing with your friends and family tonight. Two quick little quotes from her. "Games of chance are such that skill, intellectual acuity, or strength do not necessarily determine the winner." So you can take that with you. And she also said in this great interview, "You usually can't play games of chance alone. I think that's critical. There are always at least two people." So hopefully y'all are going to be playing some games together tonight as we learn to play the game, which the name is escaping me, Christy, but you're going to introduce it in a second. Or you might draft a dragon, thank you.
Yes.
Or you might be like me, trying to do some of those awesome puzzles that were sent out since I don't have anyone at home with me. So
That's okay. I know that there are plenty of games over at Well Played that have multiple players, and I know that there was one, the new bird watching game, Kevin, that has a single player option. I forget what it's called, but maybe you can tell us when you come back on. Thank you, Hillary. As always, wonderful. It seems like whenever we have an idea in mind, we keep finding artworks that relate, and I'm sure that now that we're thinking about it, we'll keep finding images of cards and card playing in the museum's collection. So now let's get to the game playing part of the evening. I'd like to welcome back Kevin, who will introduce Tanner Johnson. Tanner is Well Played's game master, and if you didn't know that that was an actual job, this is something that I learned about yesterday, and I'm absolutely fascinated, so maybe he'll talk a little bit about how he came to be a game master. And Tanner will also tell us more about Draft a Dragon and to show us how to play. At this point, as a reminder, if your screen isn't already set to presenter view, I recommend doing that now. Tanner will be sharing his screen with us as he does the demo, and this will make it much easier for you to see the cards. So Kevin, set us up here.
Oh,
You're unmuted now, Kevin.
Thank you. So, of course, there are other card decks we're familiar with besides our typical 52 card decks that, we play an array of games from bridge to poker to blackjack. Probably one of the most famous decks of cards outside of playing cards is, of course, the tarot. And the tarot is believed in many ways to have been an evolution out of the cards. It dates back to 15th century Italy, and we think probably was a way to introduce another card game. It is a card game until the late 1700s, when an interest in the occult throughout Europe would lead to this reinterpretation of the tarot, particularly under the hand of Aleister Crowley and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, that leads to the modern tarot that we think of today. But they're not the only set of divination cards. The Lenormand cards is another great, often used modern set of divination cards. But the other cards we're often familiar with are baseball cards. They were collector's cards to gain interest in baseball, but then eventually to sell confections and cigarettes. Well, all of this would eventually come together in 1993 back to playing cards with Magic the Gathering. And Magic was a card game that was very much building on the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons, which was not a card game. But the idea was to collect sets of cards, build some decks of cards to be able to play a game somewhat similar to D&D. However, by 2008, we saw a different interpretation of these kinds of games with what came to be called deck building games. And the very first major version of this is Dominion, which is still an extremely popular game today. Instead of collecting packs of cards that you would then sort of build your characters, there's built sets of cards within the game that you are then sort of forced to build your framework. This began an entire genre of games referred to as the deck building games. There are a variety of other options: Ascension, Trains, Tyrants of the Underdog, Aeon's End, that are depicted here. Well, we carry all of these at Well Played. That's part of the games that we play, both board games and card games. We today have a collection of some 800 different games over at the shop. And the guy that manages all of the games for us is Tanner Johnson. Tanner was the very first team member that joined Well Played in the spring of 2017 before we opened. And Tanner, as I love to tell the story, Tanner went to college at Campbell University in Buies Creek, North Carolina. If you've not been to Buies Creek, North Carolina, there ain't a whole lot to do in Buies Creek, North Carolina. And Tanner, realizing that, started to get very interested in playing board games and started hosting board games and became quite a bit of a savant of board games, to the point, and I'm truly not being hyperbolic, Tanner literally knows how to play and teach every one of the games that we have in the collection. Nearly 800 games at Well Played. And so he got to the point that he knew games well enough that he began to put his own hand in designing games and developed Draft a Dragon, which we premiered on our first anniversary in March of 2018. And Tanner's going to talk more tonight about how they developed Draft a Dragon and how to play. So Tanner, turning it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Just to reiterate on the points that Kevin gave, and thank you for that wonderful intro. I'm Tanner Johnson, and I am the game master for Well Played, and have been so since the early spring of 2017. And yes, as Kevin said, I went to a very small school with not a lot to do in the area, but was able to, find my own interest outside of getting in trouble through the avenue of board games, and ended up finding that I got to be pretty good at teaching them, as well as just my enthusiasm for them became fairly infectious to the people around me. And I graduated from college in 2015, and very shortly after that, I moved back home to my hometown of Sylva, North Carolina, not too far here from Asheville. And I had a good friend that I had known for a while before before moving back, whose name is William Ritter. And William Ritter is a fantastic musician and just a wonderful gentleman in general, but I bring his name up because he is the co-designer and artist for Draft a Dragon, the card game that we designed. So the way that Draft a Dragon works is it's a fairly simple card game that is based off of the design and function of drafting, as such as in the name. And drafting in card games most specifically refers to when you are dealt a hand of cards, you look at all of them, you decide what one you want to keep, and then after everybody does that, you pass the rest of the cards to another person, either to your left or right, depending on what style of game you play. William and I first kicked around the idea of Draft a Dragon in 2015, but it ended up being a fairly simple thing at the time. We weren't entirely sure if we were going to put a tremendous amount of effort into making it a real thing, but we figured that it was worth enough of our effort to make something that we could enjoy and share with our friends. And so we decided to make a mock-up version using simple sleeves that you can buy at almost any hobby store, and with renderings. These are not some of the original renderings. William has the original very, very first game that we made. It was actually made out of cut up pieces of a pizza box, to be entirely honest. But we have just some examples of the original style of art that we would use. And the way that we made these function is very simple card sleeves, renderings by William Ritter. And going back to a point that Kevin brought up, I didn't know if he was going to be mentioning this, but Magic the Gathering, which I use to put inside of the sleeve to make it, you know, a bit more rigid rather than being so floppy. But that allowed us the ability to be able to show this game to our friends and say and be proud enough that we had decided to make something that we had thought was cool. And people thought it was cool too. And we started getting requests about making copies for them. And it wasn't viable for us at the moment to individually one by one go through making all of these. So we decided potentially it might be worth putting some serious effort into. And William had been a musician for a while and had some of his own albums funded through Kickstarter. And Kickstarter I had heard of before, but had never used myself. And he was the one who set up our initial plan for putting the game forward. And we released the Kickstarter, we released Draft a Dragon on Kickstarter for the 1-year anniversary of Well Played. And yeah, this is our original Kickstarter page, designed by William Ritter and Sarah Ogletree, it says there. We had set a goal of around $4,500, and we were very lucky and happy to meet our goal of over $5,000 because we just wanted to have enough copies to send out to our friends, but also make it a legitimate piece of work. We wanted the cards to be good enough quality that they could last through multiple plays. And my mission in particular was that I wanted people to know that anyone can make a game. And although we put a lot of effort into making this one, I don't want, both myself and William don't want the idea that if you don't have massive production or an already established brand that you can't make something of your own, whether that be art or whether that be through board games. And that was the avenue that we decided to take. We have been very thankful to Well Played for hosting the event that we had. We had many people come out. It was an incredibly busy evening, but we were very thankful for the support from the community. And since we were successful with the Kickstarter, we now have several copies that are available to potentially be acquired through our Well Played website, but we'll talk a little bit about more that at the end of this session. But now I'm going to switch the camera view and give you a little bit of a top-down demonstration of how the game works. Let's see if I can zoom back just a little bit. There we are. Try and get everything to focus in all right. That might be a tiny bit blurry, but that should be all right for the moment. I've got several of the copies set up in the back. So as I mentioned, Draft a Dragon is a card drafting game. And in this one box, you will receive or be able to use 2 decks of cards, which are both integral to the playing of the game. And the way that the game will function is there will be 2 rounds of drafting. You can play with anywhere from 2 to 6 players, though we do have to make some rules adjustments if you play with less than 3 or more than 5. but there is a rules outline card that comes in the box that gives you those rules for 2 players as well as for 6 players. But the traditional rules explain as follow, and I'll give a brief demonstration of them as well. In the beginning of round A, we will deal 7 Dragon Park cards to each player. Then everyone will take a look at the cards in their hand, pick a card and place it face down in front of them, and pass the rest of their hand clockwise. For step C, they'll repeat doing that step over and over again until the hand of cards is depleted and you are past the final card. Then you will reveal all the cards you have chosen and you will build your dragon. The individual pieces of the dragon cards, using the examples of the original artwork, fit together in a panorama style where you will be able to place them such as this. Dragons, you're typically going to want to be a little bit larger, but sometimes smaller can be better depending on what type of bonuses you go for. After we build our dragon, we are going to admire our work at the end of step E. That's a very important part. And for step F, we will deal out 5 action cards, which are cards from the blue back deck. Then we will draft them in the opposite direction. So if we pass them clockwise in the first round, we'll be passing this hand of cards counterclockwise. We'll then establish whose dragon is currently scoring the most points. I'll go into that in just a moment. And then that person will play 1 action card first, and then we'll play 1 action card at a time, one after another, in clockwise order until all action cards have been played. Then we'll take the final score of our dragons and points awarded by our action cards, and we'll see who the winner is. So I'll give you a demonstration as to how the scoring goes so you know how important it is for building a dragon. So there are many different types of dragons. I'll show you a couple of the cards from the top of the deck. Every card is going to have a landscape-based anatomy with one exception, which maybe we'll be able to see in the deck, but they're also all going to have a symbol in the upper left corner when you lay them out landscape. In this example, this is more of a mechanical style dragon, and the symbol for this type of dragon is the gear. This one is more of a skeleton dragon, and although it overlaps a little bit, the symbol for this type is bone. And this one is what we know as the luck dragon, which has a ancient piece of currency in the top corner. So the way that we're going to know to pick the best pieces for building our dragon is referencing our simple scoring sheet. You're going to get 1 point per dragon card that makes up your dragon. So when you receive your 7 cards for building your dragon, if you can use all of them, it's usually going to be best for you because every card you include will get you 1 point. You're also going to get 1 point for each same type connection. What that means is whenever you have 2 dragon cards that are of the same type, in this case both flame type denoted by the symbol in the upper corner, if they are both connected, you are going to receive a bonus point towards your dragon for their same type connection. So in this case, if I was building the dragon so far, I'd be getting 1 point for this card, 1 point for this card, and another point because they are touching. Then we will establish minus points for wounds. Wounds are if your dragon is missing pieces, such as its potential through the drafting process. You did not receive a set of wings, a tail, or even unfortunately, you might end up not even getting a head. But that is all right. There's going to be opportunities for fixing that later. There's also might be reasons why you make your dragon smaller, because if your dragon is made entirely of only one type, you're going to get 5 bonus points, which can be pretty big in this game when final scores for dragons tend to range anywhere from 10 to 20 points. Also, there are 6 different varieties of dragon types, and if you manage to get 1 of each of them in your dragon, which is incredibly difficult, you will get 7 bonus points. However, that can make you a target for the second round of the game. So I'm going to quickly build a demonstration dragon. Let's see. All right, so perhaps after a round of drafting, we might get a dragon that ends up looking like this. It's made up of a bunch of different types, but let's go ahead and get an example of what our scoring might look like. We're going to get 1 point per card in our dragon. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points. We don't have any wounds, so we won't get any negative points. We'll get 1 bonus point because we have these 2 cards touching of the same variety, which will put us at 7. Our dragon isn't all the same, so no bonus there. And our dragon, unfortunately, doesn't have one of each of them, though it is made of a bunch of different varieties, so we will not get that 7 bonus points. Then in the second round of the game, we'll be drafting a hand of action cards, which have various abilities and will get you certain points. So they also might be able to allow you to mess over other people or give yourself certain bonuses. So if you focused on getting a lot of connections based on the fire dragon, this card would be worth an exceptional amount of points to you. But many cards in the deck also have what seems to be, from this perspective, a typo, an upside down +1. When you choose this card, if it has a +1 written in such a fashion, you can choose to play it for its top value, or you can play it upside down and just take 1 point. So this card is still worth it to a player to take, even if they have no fire type represented in the dragon that they selected. There are also other cards that give you bonuses if you have the most of something compared to other players. This one, a leg up, gives you +2 points if your dragon has the most legs compared to all the other players. Once again, is also still worth 1 point, even if you don't have that. This one gives bonuses depending on if you have no wings. And this is a classic one that usually ends up messing over other people's plans, is there's several cards that definitely mess over other people's dragons to put you in a better position. So what's yours is mine. You can swap dragon part with one dragon part with an opponent's. It must be the same kind of part. Example, head for a head, tail for a tail, etc. So perhaps if our opponent had taken the fire tail, maybe we would take that from them because that would get us an additional point if we were able to put it down there for our connection. Oop, camera's going a little wonky. There we are. So as I'd said, each person will select 5 of these action cards. We'll establish whose dragon is scoring the most points, and then we'll play action cards one at a time, starting with the person who is scoring the best. Playing action cards, it's always beneficial for you to play later, because if someone plays this on you in the beginning, you might have a card that lets them reverse the ability that they've done to you. So not being in the first place for this first round of scoring is not always going to be the worst. That's a quick example of how Draft a Dragon is played. And I have several copies of them here. I really hope the artwork is enjoyable. The artwork is entirely attributed to my co-designer, William Ritter, who put a whole lot of heart and soul into this work. And I'm hoping at some point in the future, we will be able to work on another card game or other board game in the future.
Thank you so much. I was actually going to ask you, Tanner, about the artwork. Is that something that he does sort of as a hobby, or is he actually sort of a card genius and an artist?
It's definitely more of a more of a hobby that we had found. He took some time to develop this. It definitely is in line with his art style, but once again, we both had the same mission, that we wanted to create a game that made it look like creating games was attainable for anyone. So we wanted the artwork to be approachable. We wanted it to be, someone could say, I think I could do something like that, but I still really like the way that looks. And the game seems simple enough. Maybe I can make something like that. And we also want to do that to help keep the price points low. But William's traditional avenue of art is music, but he grew up in a family of very talented artists, so he is very well-rounded.
So it comes naturally.
Absolutely.
Love it. Thank you so much. We now have a few minutes for questions, to answer any of the questions that you've sent in throughout the program. If you haven't sent in a question yet, now's the time to do so. Please submit questions or comments for any of our special guests in the chat box now, although I do think that we've lost Ben. So if you have anything for Devil's Foot, we will pass it on to them. Please feel free to put it in the chat box, and we will get you an answer to your question. So there was a question, I think for you, Kevin. Let me find it. Somebody had asked, is it possible that cards were popular in Islamic cultures and maybe they were banned? Do you know, Kevin?
So there's some controversy over that. There's not a really clear. There's definitely some scholars who think that may have been the case, that over time they came to be banned. It would not be surprising in the European context. Cards are continually managed. I mean, there is a deep concern that cards will, upend society, and folks of every economic level played cards, from the very wealthy to the very poor, and so that was it. It was one of the few threads that sort of ran all across all the stratas. So seeing that in the European context, I think that could very well be the case, and some scholars do believe to be the case in the Middle Eastern context as well.
Thank you, Kevin. For both you and Tanner, I think I started something over in the chat box. People want to know about the bird watching game. Wingspan, I think it's called. Do you guys have it over at Well Played?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, we do. We do have a copy of Wingspan. Wingspan is a game that is designed and released by Stonemaier Games, with the head designer of that company being Jamie Stegmaier. A hallmark of that brand, of their brand of producing games, is very lavish productions with fantastic artwork, with high levels of strategy, but approachable levels of difficulty. Though the game of Wingspan can seem a bit overwhelming, it is a very elegant implementation of trying to take the elements of running an aviary and attracting birds and promoting the knowledge of birds and migration through various aspects of both breeding, climate preservation, and various aspects such as that. The artwork for it is fantastic. Every card for the birds is unique within the game. There's over 200 cards that are all unique birds that also at the bottom of each of them have a small piece of information about them in real life, whether they migrate, or about their mating rituals, or just about cool information about where you might find them in general. It is available to be played from 1 to 6 players. That company also does make sure a lot of their games are available for one person to play. And their system is known as the Automata, which is a deck of cards that simulates an opposing player, that when you do play individually, you will play against the deck of cards that you'll flip over, and it will have instructions on the card how that the game itself will make a move. Very similar to playing against a computer game, but a little bit more, archaic and down to earth.
That game was also one of the winners last year of the Kennerspiel des Jahres, which I'm not a great German pronunciation, but it's the International Board Game Awards, and it received the Connoisseur Game of the Year last year for 2019. If you don't know, the Germans are the board game players of the planet. It was a study that came out just about 5 years ago that of Germans at home on any given night, 82% are playing a board game. That's a lot of board games. And it actually comes out of World War II. Germany was in such disarray after the war. So much of it didn't have electrical power. The towns were torn up. That came to be a home play, and in a favorite playing at home. And because of that, much of the innovation in board games in the past 20 years has very much come out of Germany. Folks may be familiar with the game called Catan, originally called Settlers of Catan. That came out in Germany in 1994 and into 95, and then in the United States in 2003. That's the game that changed it all. If you're not familiar with modern board games, they took a very different slant than the historic games like Monopoly that was winner take all. Most modern board games are designed in a way that every player stays playing the whole game until the end, and then there's some kind of points assessment. And then a lot of modern games cause you to have to be cooperative. Like with Monopoly, you don't really want to be cooperative. With Catan, you want to be cooperative, even if you're trying to defeat the other players. And that's seen very much, no puns intended, one of the most popular board games is Pandemic. And pandemic is exactly what it sounds. It's you are working together against the game, trying to prevent the spread of a global pandemic. And that's part of a whole genre that's where you are playing against the game versus playing against each other.
Got it. Kevin or Tanner, do you know the origins of Scopa, which Shane and his family play?
I'd say off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with the origins of the game. Though I have heard of the game, I don't know a ton about its history.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not familiar with Scopa.
Okay, we'll try and figure it out. I'm sure that Tanner's getting on Google right now to find some stuff out. So maybe we'll have an answer for you. If not tonight, we'll follow up with you, Shane. Chris asks, for Kevin and Tanner, what are your favorite board games to gift to new board game players who are adults?
I think I typed in a response for that, but I also would definitely like to verbalize on that there's so many good entry-level games out there that it can be, honestly, it's one of the weird things where if you, as long as you go for something that is of a modern design, you are very likely to find something that is good. There is so much out there that has come out. We've been in a board game renaissance for nearly 20 years, and many people are just now realizing how amazing some of the games are that come out. A few ones that I would recommend are Ticket to Ride came out in 2004. Another German game-based design, and it won the Spiel des Jahres, which is the German Family Game of the Year award, and it's the most prestigious award in board gaming. We had mentioned that Wingspan had won the Kennerspiel, which is the German Strategy Game of the Year award, and they also have the Kinderspiel, which is the Kids Game of the Year award, in a reference to how the root word of kindergarten. But Ticket to Ride is an excellent example, very easy to get into, accessible play, and it has some roots in traditional card games. For anyone who's maybe played Rummy before, you can instantly latch on to how the card aspect works for playing Ticket to Ride. A couple other more modern ones that I would highly recommend are Splendor and Tiny Towns. Splendor came out maybe about 5 or 6 years ago and has received a lot of critical acclaim. And Tiny Towns came out this past year, and that has been my #1 go-to introductory game to teach people at Well Played ever since we got it. It plays all the way up to 6 players, has a wonderful pace, and the best thing it has about it is a tremendous amount of replayability, because in it you are building an individual tiny town, but the buildings you are building from there's always 7 that are in the middle of the table that anyone can build, and everyone has a private building that they can build and only they can build. But the 7 that you choose from in the beginning are from a list of nearly 40 buildings. So every time you play, those 7 games can be switched out, giving you a fresh experience every time you play. So Ticket to Ride, Splendor, and Tiny Towns are my 3 recommendations for both for young adults and adults in general who are looking to get into the hobby.
What about you, Kevin?
The newer games I'll tell you the ones that get pulled off the shelf the most are Catan, Ticket to Ride, Pandemic, Dominion. I'm missing one, Tanner. There's one other one right in that middle. It's right in this little section right over here that we keep the most popular. And then the most popular card by far is Exploding Kittens. Exploding Kittens is a fun, hilarious game. Do beware, if you buy Exploding Kittens, there's the standard version and there's the not suitable for work version. So if that's important to you, choose accordingly. That's the game we have to replace the most at Well Played. It's a card game and it gets played so much that the cards get worn out anywhere between 3 and 4 months that we have to replace that one. I also would bring up Exploding Kittens too. Tanner talked about Kickstarter. Kickstarter is the online funding platform. Their #1 genre on Kickstarter of all the wild things they fund are board games. That is the #1. That is the moneymaker for Kickstarter. And in fact, Exploding Kittens is still the 3rd highest Kickstarter of all time. Their original goal was $10,000. $8.7 million ended up going in. The artist for that game was popular before that. And when people realized what he was doing, they've had a good time. There's a later game that's not as popular, but a fun game, also card genre, Bears versus Babies, where bears are fighting an army of babies. It's as weird and strange as all of that sounds, for sure. The other one is a game Tanner taught me called Suro. It is such a simple little game. It's a game of pathways that is super simple. It's about you trying to stay on the board and push your neighbors or other players off. You play it and you think, well, this is really simple. And you get into the third round and go, oh my gosh, there is some super strategy to this. Tanner, someone asked the question about your favorite two-player. And I know you get asked that a lot at the shop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had responded back to that. Jaipur is a two-player resource management card game. Although I'm sure very few people have heard of that game, many of you, if not all of you, have heard of the game of Settlers of Catan. Jaipur is what I found to be the best approximation of that game for just two players, because Catan itself has a growing positive experience the more players you add, up to a certain number, of course. But Jaipur is excellent with two players, where there is a central market of cards, and you have your own hand of cards and chips for various resources on the side. Each turn, you can either take cards from the market and add them to your hand, or sell sets of cards from your hand to gain the chips that are worth points. Once 3 piles of chips are empty, the game will be over. The key of where the strategy comes in is if you take a single card from the market, you take that for free, and then it is instantly refilled from the top of the deck. However, if you want to take more than one card from the market, you have to put cards from your hand back into the market to replace the slots of the ones you took. And the reason why you might want to do that is because rare resources in the deck might come up and you don't want to give your opponent an opportunity to pick them up. Also, the larger the set of a resource you sell, the more points you'll get. So selling 2 bundles of spice will get you some points, but selling a bundle of spices will get you less as well. There's also a game that came out this past year called Mandala, which is designed as an homage to the Tibetan monks who spend hours upon hours, if not days, designing very intricate mandalas out of colored sand and then sweeping them away as a representation of lack of attachment to this world and something that's very important to their culture. And I found that this card game is an excellent representation of that, a fantastic thought-provoking 2-player game, and some amazing artwork to boot.
Wow, I'd like to check that one out. The sand mandalas are so beautiful. Brian asked Tanner about the symbols in the top left-hand corner of Draft a Dragon. What were some of the other symbols?
Yes, so the variety of symbols go from, there are 6 different varieties of dragons, and they each have a different symbol. There is the flames, which represent the fire dragon. There is the feather, which represents the wing, which is the winged or feathered dragon. That the fire dragon is much more of an homage to traditional European style dragons. Large set of wings, fire breathing, horns on their head, classic what you would imagine a knight going off to fight. The feathered dragon is more similar to Aztec and South American representations of dragons, similar to that of Quetzalcoatl. Also, there is a living bird that is named after it as well, and that's the one that we took. There is the water droplet, which represents the water dragon, which we made look very much like a salamander because water dragons in Japanese and Chinese culture, salamanders in Japanese and Chinese culture are known as water dragons. There was a gear, which represented the mechanical dragon, which, we had to put in a robot dragon because robots are just cool. There's not much reasoning beyond that. The bone dragon, because we thought everything in it was looking too nice and cuddly, so we need to make something that looked really weird.
I love that card.
And the luck dragon, which is the one that has the old Chinese currency sort of coin in the upper corner, and it's much more of a lung style dragon, an Eastern dragon that in artwork is much more snake-like and not represented having wings, but having long whiskers from its face and flying amongst storm clouds.
Gotcha. Thank you, Tanner. I think we have time for one more question, and there was a question from Shane to Kevin, who wants to know, do you have a selection of tarot decks at Well Played?
We don't have tarot decks at Well Played, though I will give a pitch. The shop Gaia on Lexington Avenue has the most extraordinary collection of tarot decks I have ever seen. There are probably 150 different kinds of tarot decks, and that's Gaia, like Mother Earth, and it's on North Lexington.
Awesome. And I know that you already responded in the chat, but in case folks aren't keeping up with the chat, Kevin, somebody had asked if you have checkout or rental games from Well Played. I guess the question for you is really, what are the next steps for Well Played? We were talking about this yesterday. It's Well Played's sort of premise is people coming together and people touching things. So what are your plans moving forward?
Neither of which are extremely popular right now, Christy. So we are actually looking at a potential board game rental model that you could come rent games for a set period, sort of the old Blockbuster video kind of thing. And we'd have some great snacks and beer and wine and other drinks to be able to take home with you. We're literally working through that right now. It's a real challenge because of the limits on the number of folks you can have. And frankly, a lot of folks just still not feeling comfortable being inside a restaurant. And a lot of our board games, frankly, don't play well outside, even though we have a good outside space. Lots of little papers and things like that, paper money and all that. So we're working through that. We're anticipating if that's the model we're going to head, we'll see that in the next week or two.
Great. Well, keep us posted. And if you do do a social post, let us know so that we can share that with our followers as well to keep them in the loop on what you guys are doing over there on Wall Street. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. A special thank you to Ben from Devil's Foot, Kevin and Tanner from Well Played Café, our own Hillary and friends at Food Experience for their contributions to this virtual event. If you haven't already gotten your copy of Draft a Dragon, please head over to the museum's website. A link is posted on the Art of Games event page, and I think that Kristen had also put it in the chat box a little further up. I also hope that you enjoyed the brain teasers that we sent out. We're planning to continue adding those to the museum's blog. We'll be sending out an evaluation to collect your feedback on this evening's program, so please watch your email. We look forward to welcoming you back to the museum and Perspective Cafe as soon as it's safe to do so. In the meantime, we enjoy interacting with you through our Museum from Home initiative. If this is your first virtual program, we do offer a wide variety of virtual programs, including weekly programs for museum members, weekly docent-led art discussions, a rotating menu of adult studio classes, a monthly book discussion, and these third Thursday evening partnership programs. We even launched our popular summer art camp this week for kids in the virtual realm. Most of our online programs are recorded and posted on our website within a day. So if you can't attend or need to leave early, you can catch up with us through videos. We publish new articles on our blog most days and post new art activities for families to enjoy together each Monday. Thank you all again for your support. Stay safe and have a great rest of your evening.